Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about micro-learning across cultures. And it's a lot about inclusive design. And I'll talk a little bit about my role because I know it is a mouthful. And I'll talk a little bit about what I do in my organization and how this is relevant and how I think maybe there's some things in here that hopefully you can apply as well. So I work for something called the Learning Passport, which is like an educational technology solution that was created to help bridge disparity gaps, particularly with helping with continuity of instruction for children, teachers, and families that were displaced by war, from refugee crisis, from climate change, and of course, from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we operate on a Microsoft community training platform, but we're more than just a learning management system or an ed tech solution, but we also have the pedagogical components that go along with it. And I work with all the regions of the UN in many different countries. And in like a given week, I may talk to, so for example, like last week, I spoke with Egypt, Honduras, I've had communication with Nepal, with Jamaica, all different regions across the world, and help them in a few different ways. So help them to evaluate content for their platform. I work with like different country office focal points inside countries, so like UNICEF personnel. And I help them on online pedagogy. So my background is an online pedagogy expert. I was a professor for 10 years. I taught graphic design and educational technology. And before this role, I was a learning designer at Harvard Graduate School of Education, working in the Adolescent Ethnic Racial Identity Lab, as well as the Teaching and Learning Lab. So I bring all those experiences with me in my current role on helping to advise and train and work in like an L&D type of role, primarily creating guidance for internally. So I came up with some tips and some suggestions, but I also want to hear what you think too. So feel free to add into the chat there. And I can take questions at the end too, but what do you think, or what do you think we should consider when we're creating micro guidance on a global team? So a lot of the trainings that I do with various internal employees are create these 7 TAPS types of courses that we could quickly put together some materials to help them with their online pedagogy needs and things like that. So what do you think we should consider? What are some things to think about here? So I'll let you post some stuff there. And then I'll share some of the tips that I have as well. Okay. So one of my tips is no jargon. So this is, when we think about jargon, we think about like, what industry are you in, right? So prior to this, I was in academia. Our academia has its own set of jargon, its own sort of phrases and so forth that we may use, acronyms. I've been working in tech for a very long time. And there's so many acronyms in technology, right? So we want to try to avoid all of that, all that tech speak. I know this is something I've always had to work on, is like when I write something, it's often like Grammarly is telling me I'm at like the PhD dissertation like level of speaking. And like, I guess it's because I have a doctorate or I'm used to academic writing, but I need to be able to learn how to like speak and write and more clear language, more concise language. So this is really helpful across cultures, because when we're working with employees where English is not their first language, we want to make sure that we're just like clear, get rid of the jargon, get rid of the acronyms. If you have to use them, explain what they are. The UN, for example, has so many acronyms and so many phrases that like I had a hard time learning those, you know. So luckily I had a little glossary cheat sheet that someone gave to me that I could quickly like get up to terms on to figure it all out. But when we're speaking or when we're writing, try to avoid jargon. Next, use inclusive imagery. So what does that mean? If anybody wants to take a guess, when I say use inclusive imagery, what do you all think about that? How can we use inclusive imagery? What does that even mean? Where do we find it, right? So I think these are common questions that we all look for, or that we all look for the answers, right, as an L&D professionals. When we try to like Google Images or go onto different stock photo sites and we put in certain terms, we oftentimes don't find what we're looking for. But as an added bonus for this conference, there's a course that's linked at the end of this presentation. And inside there, I have a stock photos of different diverse stock houses, I guess, that you can look through that will help you to find better imagery. So that's just something that I wanted to tell you. But inclusive imagery, we want to make sure that we have it. We want to make sure we have representation, right? So when we're creating courses or we're creating guidance, if you were to go to, say, on pexels.com, right, and you typed in engineer, what would you find? Would you find like a white male that's like working on a computer? Or maybe you would find the majority of images like that, right? But would we find someone who is like in a wheelchair? Would we find someone of different ages, different genders, right? So thinking about like including a wide range of representation and not always using the same type of images for content. So we want to be inclusive, because especially for children, when we think about children, we want to think, even though we have an underrepresentation of, say, Black women in tech, that doesn't mean that we should like not include images like that. We want to include that because we see that we want children to see themselves in the images and to feel like they can to be anything they want to be, right? So we want to make sure that we're being inclusive, we're including representation when possible. Now, I'm not sure if you can hear this or not. I tried to enable the sound. Let me know if you can.
In 7 taps, there are AI characters that can be programmed to speak in multiple languages using the tech from the company Synthesia. This is one step towards translation. Just be sure to have a native speaker review the content for accuracy and adjust as needed. Be aware that certain words or phrases do not translate appropriately.
Okay, so hopefully you could see that. And if you're aware, 7 taps can create these great little characters. What I found I've used is I've been able to use the editing the scripts. You could turn it into different languages. So we also have a version here in Spanish.
En 7 taps hay personajes de IA que se pueden programar para hablar en varios idiomas utilizando.
And I think that they do a pretty good job. This is using machine translation. Of course, when we work, we also use translators and a variety of different resources, but it's great that I think that 7 taps has this. We have the closed captions, so it's really wonderful. So when we're thinking about languages, one of the things that I look for is open educational resources for children, and to find them, a lot of the stuff that we find is from the global north. So I don't know who is here from the global north, if you want to tell us, or who's here from the global south, but a lot of the stuff that we find in the open educational resource area is created either from like a westernized point of view or Americanized point of view, or from the global north, meaning that a lot of the stuff that's out there is not going to resonate with many of the children that we see in underserved populations. So I try really hard to try to source that and to try to advocate for more open educational resources that are going to resonate with our children. So that is like advocating for more content in different languages, not just in English. Our most requested languages are English, French, Spanish, and Arabic, but there's also many, many other languages that are requested. Our Learning Passport platform currently has 46 different languages that it has the ability to be set in, with more along the way coming up. Digitally accessible content. This is just a tip that, whenever possible, if you can try to create digitally accessible content, don't get overwhelmed with this. Progress over perfection, and start small and always improve for like the next time you're working on stuff. So for example, like maybe this time you're tackling for your courses or your materials, making sure that the color contrast is high enough so that it helps with students who have visual impairment, for example. Some of the main tips for digital accessibility, I just wrote a book called Graphic Design for Course Creators, which is free and available on Pressbooks. It's a CC BY license, meaning you can take it, adapt it, translate it, change it, whatever you want. So, but these are the main sections that I focused on in that book on the digital accessibility part. There's two parts. There's visual design and digital accessibility in that book. And these are the main things to really focus on to try to improve, or those main categories. Also, context. So it's hard to develop guidance internally or for students because we don't always know the context. So I work through headquarters. So I'm a remote employee. I go in maybe like once a month or so, but I just had the opportunity to go to Ghana and Africa a couple weeks ago. And it was wonderful because as I'm working with them, I was able to understand the context of the audiences that we serve. So I spoke with teachers, I spoke for students, I spoke with policymakers, politicians, different organizations in the UN, NGOs, publishers, and like talks a lot about like, so for example, when we're thinking about educational content, I talk to publishers that create content with local Ghanaian illustrators and local Ghanaian authors to make sure that it resonates. Last week, I spoke with Honduras over the phone, and we may be going to do a mission there. And we talked about teacher professional development training. But the thing that we had to think about with context is this, what you're seeing is a map of connectivity. GIGA is an organization that is like helping to map which countries have Wi-Fi or internet ability. And Honduras, as you see, doesn't have a lot of connectivity. So when we're thinking about planning digital learning, we have to figure out, okay, I think they're going to be a good candidate for offline learning solution, which is we have like a server that allows online learning in low resource areas. So context is so important at all times. Another thing that our organization did was create like a gender responsive tool. And inside that micro course that's linked at the end, you'll see an assessment tool for how to evaluate gender responsiveness. It's on a scale because we really want to think about not just from an Americanized point of view, but when we're thinking about gender responsiveness, we want to think about it across the world. So in many places around the world, girls aren't able to go to school past a certain grade. A lot of times you see like teen pregnancies, you see child marriages and all kinds of stuff like that. So we want to try to fix those problems. And that starts with even the educational content that children see. And we want to make sure that the images that we're selecting, the words that we're saying, that we're encouraging more gender parity in the world. So that's something I also am very aware of in my role. We want to make sure that when we're selecting images and we want to be inclusive, we want to make sure we're not selecting stereotypical images or ableist images or gender exclusive images or racist images. So let's do a little quick check and maybe you can tell me what you think about these images. So I know you don't have a lot of context, but if we were to take this image here, say, we're creating a course on cooking. Do you think an image of a girl here in an apron is an inclusive one? What do you all think? Okay, I got a lot of no's. I have some thumbs ups. Do you think it's gender responsive? So what I would say is, I don't think there's anything wrong with this picture, but maybe there's a better solution. So oftentimes we see women in the kitchen, images of them cooking. What if we had an image, if it's a cooking course that we're designing, why don't we have the male and the female working together, cooking together? The woman is not serving the man, but they're working together to create their meal. Maybe a better choice. Again, context matters, but when you're looking for imagery, really stop and evaluate, like, is there a better way to show this? Okay, let's try another one. What if we're doing a course for landscaping? It's a landscaping course, and we had a Latinx male as the character of the landscaper. Is this stereotypical? Do you think that this is gender inclusive? Do you think it's stereotypical? Tell me what you think. Yes, stereotypical. Yes, I agree. So maybe we often don't think of female landscapers. So maybe we want to include that either image. It's not horrible depending on the context. Again, context matters, but maybe we want to start challenging our biases and what we think of when we say, like, if we were to close our eyes and before I did this and I asked you, like, picture a chef in your head or picture someone in the kitchen cooking. Is it a male? Is it a female? Or close your eyes and picture a landscaper, a lawnmower at your house, mowing the lawn, or someone's house mowing the lawn. Like, what do they look like? Who are they? So we have to always like challenge our biases, think of different ways to portray things. What about positive stereotypes? Is there such thing as positive stereotypes? What do you all think? Yes, there is such thing as positive stereotypes. And is it a good thing? What if we said, okay, all Black people are good athletes? What's wrong with that? Is that okay to say? If we had a course that's on, sports and it only had Black people, would that be okay? So sometimes positive stereotypes, even though you might think that sounds like a positive thing, it could be harmful because we're still being stereotypical. And what about this image? What about the image of what if you said all Asians are good at school? Or is that stereotypical? Is this harmful? It could still be harmful, right? Because it sets up a level of perfection. And it can make people feel like they're never going to achieve that, or that they have to live up to that standard. So we want to be aware that like positive stereotypes can also be harmful. So all stereotypes are bad. We don't want to have them at all. So wanted to bring that up. And here's some resources on checking your biases, which is a Harvard study where you could kind of, it's a really interesting link, and you could kind of go through and like check your biases to see, like, it's eye-opening, and it will really help you with, inform like how you see the world in many ways. And I think this is something that we always have to do. Nobody is perfect. I'm always trying to improve here. There's a link for my book if you want to take a look, and then a mini guide, Designing for Inclusion. So if you take a look at that, there's a lot of different resources in there and examples of like some of the stuff that I have, including like inclusive language, inclusive imagery, stock photos, and so forth, and some of the things we went over today. And here's my LinkedIn link, and feel free, anybody who's listening can reach out to me on LinkedIn for a connection. I usually accept them, so feel free to do that as well. And that's all I have for today. So let me know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed that.
No, that was let's get a bunch of emojis for this, folks. No, in all seriousness, Dr. Dawn, first of all, one, your pedigree and background. I think everybody, as you're like, well, and I've done this and I've been here, and it's like, oh, that's it. You've got an impressive background, to say the least. And I think one of the things that is really been helpful with this, I mean, this topic is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation in organizations. So I really appreciate you sharing this, because I think this is one where it can be an uncomfortable conversation to have sometimes. And one of the things that I've seen a lot is building the psychological safety in an org where you can have these discussions openly and recognize, like, look, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to catch things. That's the reason that we have conversations, so that we can say, hey, like, oh, okay, how do we fix that? What can we do differently? How might we improve upon this? Because a lot of times you find it's not the intent of the designer, but a lot of times we have a tendency to design around what we are familiar with, what's comfortable to us, instead of going, well, okay, but that may not be everyone's comfort zone. And I remember the first time stepping into a global organization, somebody asked me to read the book, Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And they're like, it's just an opportunity to start learning about other cultures and thinking beyond, how things are in the West and how we look at things here. So my question back to you is, as you look at this, where can folks get started with some of these? I think you gave some great examples, but I think sometimes people can feel overwhelmed because you start thinking about how diverse organizations can be, an audience, and you're like, how many languages and all. And you highlighted some of the ways tech's making that easier, but do you have any tips for folks who are trying to become more inclusive in their
Yeah.
design?
I mean, I think recognizing where you are in intersectionality and where you are like in the spectrum of privilege is like a first step. A lot of this work is like internal, right? And personal, and thinking of your own, I think of my own DEI journey too, and just having to evaluate like and thinking about how you see the world, and like you have to speak with other people and you have to learn and try to understand their lived experiences without that perception of like how you've been raised or where you were brought up. So it's harder than it sounds. It's not, it's very challenging, but like I said, like my experience, like going to Ghana was like life-changing. Like I'm looking forward to more of those opportunities. I know not everyone can travel internationally, but obviously the more you travel, that really is helpful. And speaking with your intended audience, like designing with your learner at all times. So so I think that that's really helpful too, in asking those questions about like how they perceive it. Like I've had content that I've sent to, like I have a colleague, she speaks like 4 different languages, and I'll run things by her and she'll look at it and she's like, well, the words that you used here don't exactly translate well. They may not be taken the right way. Try, changing them, or people won't understand this phrase, or that image may come across wrong, so like I get feedback and I just
having that humility to say, listen, I'm taking a first pass. I'm looking for that feedback. Yeah. No, I think that's a really great point to call out, because it can feel threatening. It can feel like, well, I wasn't trying to do that. And we can go into defensive mode versus saying, no, I just want to understand. And I think sometimes we don't listen to understand. We listen to respond. And it's like, well, listen, try and understand. I know, with as many kids as I have, I don't get a chance to travel as much as I used to. But even setting up time, I regularly set up time with people from all around the world just to get to know people, because it is an opportunity to hear lived experiences and shared experiences and go, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that because my experience is different than that. Okay. Well, I just, again, this is an important topic. And I think for a long time, I've been in this field for a long time, and a lot of times this gets overlooked because it's thought to be, well, it's too expensive, it's too time consuming, it's too this and that, not realizing the negative impact it can have. So, the other thing I'm curious about on your end is, so you've highlighted some of the things that you've done to kind of help expand your horizons. Any other kind of like watch outs or things that maybe are I love that you brought up the stereotypes. Sometimes that's like, oh, but that's a good stereotype. And I think one of the things that's interesting about that is, somebody once said, I don't remember where I heard it, but they said stereotypes aren't necessarily wrong, but they're incomplete. And that's the problem, is that it's not an accurate representation of people. It's like, well, okay, there might be some truth maybe in there, but it's not the whole story, and everybody's individual journey is completely different.
Yeah. You have to always like second guess everything. Like here's an example. Like I recently interviewed some people, and not everyone wrote a thank you note back. I even posted about this on LinkedIn, and I was like, this is really weird. Like I've written a thank you note to everyone. And then I realized from the like comments and started talking to people internally that were around the world that's like a cultural thing, that not everybody like culturally will do that. And I had to check my bias, because I'm like, I have to make sure that I'm not evaluating based on that. So like thinking like everything you do, I think in work in a global organization, you have to constantly check your biases, like for example, even thinking about eye contact. In some cultures, eye contact is respectful for an authority, and in other cultures it is disrespectful. So there's context is everything. You have to just like, we're all in L&D, and I think we're all like insatiably curious and like crazy researchers in everything we do. So I think that helps. So like learn as much as you can on your own, about that culture, about that, about the context. I think that's the best advice I can give to improve.
No, I think, and you know, like I said, when I first came back on, I think there's this tendency to pull back from these conversations because it can be a little uncomfortable. It can be a little awkward, like, oh, I don't know where to start, or I don't want to say the wrong thing. But I think more than anything, we really have an opportunity. That's why I was thrilled to see this as a topic, because I think we do need to lean into these conversations and recognize, like, hey, it's not always going to go great. We might, you know, have some dip back and forth, and that's okay, because that's how we talk more openly about it and create an environment where people feel like they can speak up and say, hey, I have a chance to share my point of view, and it's
Yeah.
heard, it's listened to, and it's taken into consideration. So I
Yeah.
just really, really appreciate you bringing your experience, your exposure. And again, I love the fact, 7TAP's team, that you're thinking about this in the product, because really technology is making this so much easier.
Yes.
Um,
Like, I love like the AI characters and how they're like there's so many different representations of the way that they look as well, because I think that that's helpful. And
Yeah.
all of the languages, like I think I went to the Synesio website and I think they said there was 65, and I used it as a use case for the Ukraine Learning Passport. It's like a mental health psychosocial resource hub in that use case to help with the Ukrainian families who have been displaced. So in that case, it's not a traditional educational format, educational platform like it normally is.
Yeah.
But I created like a prototype of like someone speaking Ukrainian and saying like, here's a set of resources that may help you with stress management, you know, and I could program it right in there. And I didn't have to it's just like a really great tool in so many use cases in so many ways. So I really appreciate that part of 7TAPs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this used to be, I mean, realistically, and I think if you look back, I mean, I've been in this space for a long time, and you look back, some of this stuff was very difficult to do 10, 15.
Yeah.
It was very expensive. It was very time consuming. And again, it wasn't necessarily people didn't want to. It was, we don't have budget, you know, to translate this stuff into X number of languages type of a thing. And I think this is where I'm really excited to see technology democratize our ability to get to know other individuals and better represent everyone and make others feel included, instead of like, well, this is all we can do. We got to hit the, you know, what we assume is 80%, which really isn't 80%. I mean, that's just not even an accurate representation.
Yeah.
No, well, this was absolutely fantastic. I appreciate, I sincerely appreciate you joining and sharing this. I really hope everyone's been able to take something from this. And just again, some of these changes you mentioned, these are not necessarily dramatic rocket science type changes, but simple step changes that you can make in the way you design, in the way you create content, to better convey your message and better represent the audience that you're trying to reach.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, remember, you got to hang around, because
Yep.
there's going to be other times we're going to bring you up on stage, and we're going to do all this sorts of stuff. So for everybody who's here, if we can get one more round of emojis, you know, normally we have like a little bit of a break, but the discussion was just so good with this one. Gideon was so patient with me. He's like, you know what? It's fine. We'll do magic after the next one. But I think this is a topic that isn't happening enough in the industry, and one that we really need to highlight and think about and push forward. So thank you for facilitating that.